Hi, my name is Patrick Jackson. This is my Module 11 case study for AEP 858. A summary of this situation is that I'm a first-year principal who's been given a directive to improve the attendance data for the high school that I've been taken over by the Board of Education and Superintendent. At semester, I'm reviewing the data and identify 5 students who have missed more than 10 days during the first semester for various reasons having to do either with athletics or family situations. And I have made a decision to improve the culture to value attendance as a means to drive student success. Legal and ethical issues that we look at here, all the students who identified, we saw a decrease in academic achievement, which is kind of gives us a link to the importance that attendance has on student success. And so we're looking at these students who are failing and a school who is also failing by allowing this to happen. I didn't mention before, but the school also was identified as the lowest attendance rated school in the district. Ethical, responsible attendance tracking is not taking place currently, not only by the teachers who have a responsibility to track attendance correctly and appropriately, but also in situations where counselors and probably administration that was previous to myself did not take the steps they needed to ensure that things were being taken care of properly. When we look at the state's ability to override parent control to ensure that students are being successful as members of the state, that's something that we need to take into account, because that could be something that we need to look into as we address some of these situations with some parents. As some of those students who are identified, their issues did have to do with parent decisions, not so much student decisions or student habits that were based around parent decisions. And then various factors that I would need to take into account when addressing these issues could include things like age, home life, and health. And so I have to be pretty subjective when I'm paying attention to those things and making decisions on how to handle this. To sum up the situation in a statement, I say after reviewing attendance data from the first semester, I realized that cultural change in our learning community, which includes parents, must take place that promotes the importance and value of regular attendance to increase academic success in students. This was made apparent after reviewing the files of 5 students had 10 or more absences in the first semester and making comparisons to their academic growth. Things that we do know about, people include myself, the principal, a first-year principal in this building, coming in and having the ability to make change. We also have the 5 students identified with their absenteeism, as well as the parents who are involved in some of those situations that are contributing to the absenteeism, as well as the teachers and counselors who are identified in the situation generally that are also contributing to the lack of attendance from some of these students. Okay, the place is Golden Oaks High School. It's a suburb community that is also a commuter community, where parents are driving into a bigger city, the adjacent larger city for work. It's a pretty diverse social, economic, and cultural, which has grown more recently, and so that may play a part in some of the parents' decisions based on their commuting from the suburb into the city to work and their priorities in their own life. The program is that this is a high school. We offer many extracurricular opportunities for students. We have the lowest attendance rate in the district, and there has been little staff turnover in the last 10 years, which kind of leads us to believe that a lot of teachers may not be prepared for change or ready for change. They may be content with what has been happening in the building up to this point. Okay, things that we don't know, policy and protocol. We don't know what the previous attendance reporting policies and protocols were, nor do we know the truancy protocol. At least it's not stated in the case. We don't know what the former principal's expectations were for staff or for families, or how that principal communicated and interacted with families and parents. Nor do we know what the vision of the school is, if that's something that we need to keep and revise or completely redo to help focus the culture a little bit more on valuing attendance for student growth. And then also we get a glimpse of the culture of the teachers a little bit in this case, but we don't quite know the data capacity, what the staff has, as it doesn't talk much about how data is shared with staff members or how it's used professionally for growth in the staff or in the students. As we prioritize the information, there's a few things that we have to consider. One is the doctrine of parents patriae, where it has been deemed legally that requiring an education is not asking too much, and that the state's prerogatives outride those of the parents when the welfare of the child is not being taken care of. And in that instance, when you tie those two ideas together, when education is not being prioritized for a student, the state can step in and take action to ensure that students are receiving an appropriate education. And that is a tool, unfortunately, that can be used to make sure that attendance is mandatory for students, and that steps can be taken to make sure that students are actually participating in school. That could be a tool that is used when communicating with parents about the importance of their students being in school when they have other priorities outside of their students' education. We have to consider the staff and school outcome when we make changes, utilizing some of that demographic data like tardies and absences, paired with some of the student data from testing and other assessments to see what the gaps are, to see what the comparisons are, to see if there's a relationship that we can work on and to make that visual to the staff. Also building that data capacity for staff to be able to look at that and know what they need to do, and then building protocols around it. We then have to kind of think about student outcomes. Where do we want our students to be? What's best for our students? And is what we've been doing something that needs to continue or does it need to change to benefit our students? That could even include things like goal setting for our students and having them come up with things they can do to try to get better with their own attendance. Consulting district leadership and BOE and parents is going to allow us to get some feedback and maybe some insight into how things have been and where we want to go with things, as well as how comfortable parents are understanding what new protocols need to be put in place. And along with that, investigating other area high schools' attendance protocols to get some ideas so we're not rebuilding the wheel. If somebody's already doing something that works well, we can look into that to figure out how we can implement it in our own building. We can also use that as a tool to make our situation a little bit more realistic to our own staff members who may not be willing to realize the importance of attendance with our students. And then at the end of it, student achievement is enough evidence to see. And so if our data does point out that the attendance, which within our 5 cases, does show that attendance is affecting their academic success, in all 5 of those situations, they did see a decrease in their academic achievement. So the student achievement is enough evidence in itself to point out where our pitfalls are. Looking into our options, some of the ones that I've identified, number 1 would be taking no action. This is something that I've seen principals do coming into my building, come in the first year and just see how things are done and use that as a data collecting opportunity where you continue to monitor the effects of current school practices, just to build some trust with the staff, to let them know that you're not just going to come in and take over, but you are keeping an eye on how things work so that you know exactly what needs to be fixed. Another option we have is developing a completely new protocol. Could cause for some tough conversations with staff and parents, and utilizing some of our community resources, such as our affiliations with social services or the juvenile justice system. And then a couple other options we have would be, I like to say what gets monitored get done, but putting in some accountability measures for staff to ensure that they are keeping responsible attendance records without necessarily changing all the protocols in the buildings. And on the other side of that, one way we can help get some student and family buy-in is by incentivizing good attendance with prizes or recognition or celebrations, and that could also help us build our school culture. Evaluating these options, taking no action. Some of the pros would be it would not disrupt current practices, would not stir up the pot with the staff members. It would provide for a slower, more gradual rollout and easier possibly to digest. Some of the cons would be that we would continue to see a decrease in student performance if they are not attending regularly. And in some cases, it could reinforce the current attendance practices that some teachers are already using by not making that change immediately. If we look at implementing a new protocol, some of the pros to this one is that we're establishing a shared vision. We're building a collaborative culture that values attendance, which is what our goal is. We're setting expectations with parents and other community members for change and kind of putting our foot down. And then we're going to have a quicker turnaround for improving student success related to attendance rather than sitting back and waiting for the rest of the school year to see how it turns out. Whereas we see some of the cons are it could be difficult to cultivate the buy-in. The low staff turnover means lots of staff may be stuck in their ways and may have a hard time buying in or wanting to change. We could end up seeing staff turnover by implementing new changes and having to bring new people in, which could also affect the school culture. And then the current culture is what families are used to, and that could also affect them buying in. Our other two options, monitoring and having some accountability measures put in for staff, could have staff pushback, feeling like they're being watched constantly, and identifying the holes in responsible practices would allow us to identify individuals possibly that are not following protocols. And then by putting in incentives, we would have to think about individual incentives, school-wide incentives, and maybe even family incentives. And funding could end up being a factor in that one. Creating a positive culture around attendance is a pro to that. And then one other thing is, are we building extrinsic motivation in students? Are we figuring out a way for them to get do we want them to have extrinsic rewards, or do we want them to have intrinsic rewards? So we have to keep that in mind as well. And can this be coupled with another one of our options to try to help bolster it and make it a little bit stronger? Okay, my best option would just be to implement new protocol and possibly add in incentives. For me, the biggest thing to consider is what is best for students, and sitting back and waiting is just going to continue to decrease student success. In building this new school culture, we also have to build data capacity, looking at our school leadership team and looking at school leadership to see what the best way to do that and how the best way to utilize that data is, and then really building up a value for attendance in our staff and our community as well. Making sure that our professional developments revolve around data so that it becomes a habit to look at data and to utilize it, and that becomes our key focal point and our what staff members are looking at to kind of motivate their practices. And then also having stakeholder share-outs where we share some of this data to show the community, maybe some of our community partners and even families, why we're making some of these changes so that they can buy in just a little bit better. Okay. In implementing my plan, I think first of all, we have to establish the why. If you can establish the why and make that very clear and visible, then that helps people buy in just a little bit better. Building value in the staff for data and data capacity so that it's more useful when we have those conversations. And then seeking parent-school partnerships so that we can really buy in with those parents, and we don't have to use Parents Patriae as a tool to motivate them, but we can actually just work with them to try to make changes. And then coming up with different systems of monitoring to make sure that we are not only collecting data, but that we also can see who is following through with protocol and making sure that everybody's on the same page. And then sharing new data with staff and families to show that what we're doing is actually working, and having conversations about how our changes are affecting our building. Okay, other things in implementing our plan would be to promote the value of consistent attendance and quality instruction, building trust with staff and parents to continue to build that